Well, welcome to the Houston Area Museum this afternoon for a wonderful presentation. I'm really looking forward to it, from Diane Hanson-Lambrecht. She is a Houston girl from way back, and she came to town today to help us learn about trolls. Now, just to get you a preview of what's to come, next Sunday we're having another presentation, and that's Ron and Ray Evanson talking about their trip to Iceland. And 2 weeks from that, Bill Freed from Spring Grove is coming to talk about Ola and Per, who are Norwegian cartoon characters that were developed by Peter J. Rosendahl from Spring Grove, and they were published in the Decorah paper, and there are now books of his cartoons. So we have some really excellent programs coming up. So without further ado, I will introduce Diane, and she will tell us all about trolls.
Well, thank you for letting me come and talk to you about trolls. I don't think we're any storytellers here, are there? I was raised with a grandma who was a wonderful storyteller. She never said she was a storyteller, and she never gave formal stories, but throughout my childhood, she always was telling me stories, and many of those stories had to do with being maybe a little afraid, being a little suspicious, maybe a lot of superstition, and only as I became an adult did I begin to realize that she was telling me things from her own Norwegian growing up. So when I went to college and became a teacher, storytelling was just integrated into my life. And so I was a reading language arts specialist, and my master's degree was on using storytelling in the classroom for advantages of teaching reading. So in light of that, I did a lot more research, and because of my Norwegian background, it kind of naturally led me to trolls. And so over the last 25 or so years, I've studied trolls, I've talked about trolls, I've read about trolls, I've collected trolls. So today I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who they are and their personalities. One of the things you learn if you go to Norway, it's a very lovely country. It's so picturesque, but it also is a very harsh place. Both the terrain, the mountains, the valleys, the fjords, the sometimes weather, all of those things have a huge impact on the culture of the people who live in Norway. And today's Norway is very modern, it's very wealthy, with the North Sea oil and the things that they've been able to do with that revenue has created a very modern, very expensive place to live, and it's just as beautiful as ever. But you have to remember that back in the days before electricity, the days before modern transportation, Norway was very isolated. For one thing, it's up so far, you have to learn how to live in darkness. There is a period of light, but there's a huge period of darkness. You also have to remember that that terrain creates a very dangerous environment. So one of the things that I learned as I was studying about trolls in the Norwegian culture is that these stories about trolls and other creatures were many times for entertainment in those dark, cold winter nights, but they also were a way of showing people, you know, you better be careful, because this is not a very safe place. You can fall into a hole, you can have a huge boulder come. And so the Norwegian people kind of incorporated their need for entertainment, their need for showing cautions with what became known as the troll tales. And the ideas behind the trolls go way back to the sagas of the Vikings. So many of these stories are very old, and the first one I'm going to read to you shows you how gruesome they can be. A quick story from my first trip to Norway. I went to visit where my maternal family came from, and it's Frodal, which is West Telemark. And I was sitting there with my partner that I travel with my fellow teacher. She and I were sitting there by Vrovatn, the glacial lake, and just ruminating about how beautiful this place is and how could anybody ever leave Norway. And there was a young couple that was within earshot and they spoke English. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Miss, they left because they can't eat rocks." And it's always stuck with me because yes, along with the beauty, there was a lot of tragedy as well. So many of the stories that are connected with the souls and other sagas of Norway are rather gruesome, and they kind of tell the story of what it was like to be a Norwegian many, many years ago. This is the story of Butterball. Now, many times, the stories had to do with food, lack of food, where do you find food, who has food, and the trickery that might go along with getting food. So this is the story of Butterball. There was an old woman living with a young boy who was round and fat. She called him Butterball. She has a dog with a gold tooth, and it begins to bark. Butterball runs to see why a gold tooth is barking. He runs back reporting that he sees an old hag, and we're going to talk about her later, with her head under her arm and a pack on her back. He runs under the breadboard and he hides. The hag comes to the door and says, "Good day," and the old lady replies, "God bless you," and we'll talk about that later too. The hag asks if Butterball is home, and the old lady says that he's in the woods with his father bagging grouse. "Devil take it," says the old hag. "I have a silver knife for him." "Pip, pip," yells Butterball. "Here I am." The hag tells him she is old and stiff, and he must come to her sack to fetch the knife. Of course, we know what happens. But once she stops for a rest, Butterball cuts through the sack, puts a pine root in its place, and he runs home. The hag comes again, this time promising a pretty silver fork, and Butterball falls for the promise again. This time, the hag falls asleep about a furlong away, and Butterball escapes putting a large stone in the sack. Because trolls do not see well, the hag comes home and puts the stone in her pot to make Butterball stew. But the water runs over, putting out the fire, and she realizes she doesn't have Butterball. She goes back one more time, promising a lovely silver spoon. This time, after catching Butterball, she goes straight home and instructs her daughter to cut him up and make a broth. It's Sunday, and she's going to church, and she's going to invite all her friends for a feast. Now, the daughter is puzzled as to how to do this butchering and asks Butterball if he knows and he could show her. Of course, he says yes, and he instructs her to try it by laying her head on a stool like a poor chicken, and he will show her. Once the deed is done, he puts the carcass in the pot, a pine root over the door, and a huge stone on the troll's chimney pipe. When the hag and her guests come home for the feast, they think the daughter is just sleeping. The hag invites everyone to taste the beautiful Butterball broth. But a voice replies, "Taste the good daughter broth." Wondering who is talking, they go to the door. The pine root fell, the huge stone fell, and they were all killed. Butterball gathers up all the silver, riches as could be, and shares the wealth with his mother. Now, this is not the kind of bedtime story that you probably tell to your children, but it exemplifies a lot of different things about the way troll stories are told. First of all, they are exceedingly dumb. They don't hear or process things well. And the last thing they want anything to do with is religion. Those kind of things go through all the stories about trolls. So, those long winter nights, all those things about danger, and some of the things that go on routinely in farm life are threaded all the way through troll tales. Now, there's one that all of you know, which shows a number of these very same things. Dumb. Don't process very well. And in this case, they really don't want any Christian blood around. And you know this story. It's the Billy Goat Scruff story. 3 billy goats wanted sweet grass on the other side of the bridge, up on the mountain slope. Everyone knew there was a huge, ugly bridge troll as the gatekeeper to the mountain. The smallest goat decides he wants the sweet grass and begins to walk onto the bridge. "Who's walking on my bridge?" yells the ugly old troll. "It is I, little billy goat, but you don't want to eat me. There's somebody much larger and more delicious coming after me." That sounded like a good deal to the troll, and he let him pass over the bridge to the sweet grass. Again, billy goat number 2. By this time, the big billy goat has approached the 3 bridges, and he can smell this ugly troll everywhere. As the big billy goat approaches the bridge, he says, "Mr. Troll, I can smell you, but I can't see you. I need to see who's going to eat me for dinner." As soon as the troll appears, the big billy goat butts him with his huge horns, drops him over the side of the bridge, never to be heard or smelled again. And all 3 billy goats enjoy the sweet grass all summer. So can you see, even with that little tale that we've always known, is that dumb, near a bridge, a place of danger, outwitting them, outsmarting them, and in the end, having something delicious to eat. All of those entities go into the troll tales, no matter which ones you have. There's usually a little gruesomeness there, so you got to get a little scared. There's a little entertainment there because they're like, ha ha ha, you know, they're so dumb. And then there's a little truth that runs through it too. Now, we could do stories all day long because there are stories about fishermen with big fish and, you know, all the different things that go along with that. And most of them all deal in some way or another with poor judgment. So, you know, that was entertaining for the Norwegians because, you know, life was not so great. Life could be very dull. Life could be very hard. But if you could have these little tidbits of entertainment and somebody could be really dumb, it would kind of bring a chuckle. So, in today's world, when we think of trolls, many times we think of the sweet little guy with the pink hair and the green whatever, maybe has a little nose ring or whatever have you, from the 1970s. But trolls are anything but that. They are probably the most ugly that you're ever going to see in any way, shape, or form. Carrying your head under your arm, one big eye in the center of your face, big knobs on your nose, ragged teeth. All of those are traits of a real troll. Most of the times they'll have only 4 fingers and 4 toes. And that's very interesting to know if you're going to go hunt one. You have to kind of look at their appendages. They always have a fancy tail, but humans really can't see them. So that's another thing. If you're going to go hunting for a troll, you've got to be really careful to see if they have a tail. Because, you know, trolls can be dumb, but they can be tricky. And the next thing you know, you've become into a relationship with a troll, and God darn it, you never saw that tail. Now, they very rarely wash, and if it is, it's usually just rainwater. There are usually flowers that grow in their hair, and if you think you're tripping on a root in a tree, it's like, no, it's probably a troll finger. And when you're walking in a marsh, you just might be walking in the grimy, slimy hair of a troll. And one of the things that is really interesting is that they do like silence. In addition to being dumb, concealing a tail, trying to be a trickster, poor judgment, two things trolls really hate. One of them is light, and the other thing is noise. So listen to this little story. There are 3 trolls on a mountaintop a few hundred years ago. One says, "Nice day, isn't it?" After a century goes by, the second troll says, "What did you say?" After another 100 years pass by, troll number 3 says, "With all this chatter, I'm gonna move out." Cute little story. When I was doing this presentation for Elsie and Jane Olsen with their Norwegian group, is that trolls do not like noise, and especially church bells. And Wayne Olsen said to me, "You know, Diane, the reason why there probably aren't any trolls in Yucatan or around the Stone Church or down in Sheldon is I ring the church bell." And I thought that was really cute and close to home. So, trolls are found everywhere in the culture of Norway, even to the present day. Lanesborough used to have an Ibsen festival with the literature of Ibsen, and trolls kind of run through there all the way. The most famous composer in Norway is Edvard Grieg, and he actually wrote troll music. So trolls are so integrated into the Norwegian culture that sometimes you don't even know that they're there. Now, mountain trolls are particularly ugly, but you have to understand, mountains can be extremely dangerous, you know? So you really want to stay away. You really want to be cautious. So a troll from the mountains usually has 3 heads, and he carries 1 or 2 of them underneath the armpits. Always has large warts and one big eye in the center of his head. And they don't have manners, they don't have brains, they don't have heart. They bring trouble to the mountain climbers and their equipment. They cause avalanches. They cause extremely severe storms. And this is the one that was really cute. They say that they have such bad breath that they can change the quality of the snow. Now remember, if you're Norwegian, your skiing is a pretty serious topic. So if you're out there in the mountains and there's a troll there and they're breathing down and ruining your snow, it is not going to be a good day. And this one here is also cute. You know, springtime comes in the mountains, and after a long, cold, dark winter in Norway, those icicles that are, you know, dripping off, and they really look beautiful, and they're crystallizing in the sunshine and whatever, is that the Norwegians say that when you hear that, someplace along the line the trolls are making music, and that they're bringing life back into, you know, into the culture in the springtime. And another thing that is really interesting is that if you've been to Norway, you can notice some really, really interesting rock formations. You know, like one is tipped on top of the other, and one like this, and you go like, oh my gosh, how did this ever happen? Well, if you're a Norwegian, it's because the trolls have been playing around. And if you find any of those stones in the churchyard, that's trouble. Because the trolls do not like Christianity, they do not like light, they do not like noise, and anything they can do with stones to inflict punishment or, you know, make you understand that they're there, they will do it. So another interesting thing about growing up in a Norwegian community, there was a family named Norskog here. Well, you know, skog is Norwegian for, which one is it?
The woods, the forest,
yeah.
yeah.
The woods, yep. And there are other things also that, like foss is falls or whatever, and so there are fossgrummen, which are little trolls that are in the water. And one of the things that was interesting to me, when I was growing up, if some woman was really, getting on somebody's nerves, they could just be an old hag. It wasn't, she's nothing but an old hag. And that was really an insult, when I was a child. I had no idea what it was. Well, the hag is the wife of the forest troll. And so she is one who can really cause a lot of trouble. And these are a pair of forest trolls from years and years ago that were hand carved from the first time I went to Norway. And there she is. There's a hag. Not anything real pretty about her. Sometimes when you see her in pictures, she has a pipe too. If you're gonna be dastardly, you might as well smoke too. So how did we ever get to the point where we could have all of this history? And it was because of a foresight of a couple of Norwegians, and they were in the 1830s, and all of us were raised with the Grimm's fairy tales, with the story of Hansel and Gretel and Cinderella and the pea being up on the vine, or the Jack and the Beanstalk and whatever have you. And the Grimm's brothers had decided that things were changing so much in Germany. What's going to happen to all these stories as we progress and life changes? And so they went and started to gather up all of the tales that we now know as the Grimm's fairy tales. And there were a couple of men. One's name was Abundsen, and the other one was Mo. And they decided that something should be done in Norway as well. And Abundsen was a naturalist for the state, and he went to all these different farms, as part of his job. And so he could kind of collect them. And then Mo was a theologian, but he was rich. So he could finance all these things. And so between the two of them, they were able to consolidate all of these troll tales, and they created a book in 1837 that many of the things that I have here are probably based on. So that was their way of saving, the old culture. And so we can take a look at a few of these. This one here is a Huldra, and she looks kind of cute. But if you look back here, you see that? I think we got a tail going down there. And we hear about the Norwegian farmer, the bachelor Norwegian farmer stays home with mom and pop and doesn't whatever. Well, part of that is because you want to be really careful that when you court a girl, that it's not a troll. Because they do everything they can to hide that tail. And of course, you're not really going to find that tail until after you're married. So that would be her. We talked about the wood troll, and here he is, just as ugly as can be. Just a few teeth, going every which way, really bad coloring, really bad hair. On a good day, he smells really bad. They're stupid. You can't find your way out of a paper sack. I mean, it's like just dumb as can be. The same is true with some of these other ones over here. This fellow here, he looks like he might be just a little simple. How many times do you have butterflies on your nose? And he's trying to keep his pants up, but gall darn it, that tail just is in the back there. You just can't hide it totally. And so I would encourage you to come up and look at some of these books because they really do give some excellent illustrations of how ugly they can really be, and kind of an R-rated show going on here. But just to show you about the Huldra, she is equipped to, up front, to lure any innocent farm boy underground where he can be bewitched and he must stay forever as her husband. And there she is. Can you see her? I mean, she's, you know, if you can catch her before you marry her, you can see that tail totally. I mean, and in some of the books, they have her bathing in a creek, you know, or things like that, and then up pops the tail. And that poor innocent Norwegian boy is like, gotta stay from her. I'd rather stay home with mom and dad than to end up being married to a troll. So up here I have a number of the books about the Vikings, the sagas, the trolls, I mean, all the research that I've done over the years just to come up with this concise little program. But when I was going through this morning, this morning, in one of my books, this one here is a really good one because, ooh, you can really see how nasty they are. This artist and the stories here are just, ooh, they're entertaining, but not on a dark night. But here are the guidelines. I thought this was so cute. I have to share this. Apparently, trolls cannot be exterminated, so we have to learn how to guard against them. So here's a little summary of some important precautions. Hold out a cross, a psalm book, or a steel, and saying God's name in a verse from the book of Psalms when you meet a troll. Because I didn't mention this before, but I'll mention it now. Is that when King Olaf brought Christianity to Norway, the Norwegians were very, very skeptical. You know, they had lived for centuries with their stories, with their culture, with their isolation, and here's the king, and he's telling us we have to be Christian. So the Norwegians bought it, sort of. So if you ever look at a staid church or whatever, you're going to see parts of Christianity, but just in case, you're going to see a dragon. You're going to see various things from the old Norway, because it probably is right because the king says so. Yeah, but just in case. So can you see this with the trolls here as we go through? It's like, yeah, we know they exist. We've seen them. We know. We've spent centuries with these creatures. And now we've got Christianity, and it's, when in doubt, say a psalm. Have a cross, just in case. If you meet a troll in a field, run crossways over the furrows so that your tracks make a cross. Utilize the stupidity of trolls and try to trick them. For example, by going out into the sunlight, they might split or turn into stone. And that brings an interesting story too that I didn't mention before. My family, my dad's family, immigrated to Blackhammer. And when I was a child, going up to Blackhammer, my dad always pointed out the stone people. There were two statuesque type things, and we always had to kind of stop and observe, and I had no idea what I was observing. But they were Norwegian immigrants who had created a facsimile of what was in Norway, just in case. And from what I hear, they still stand. But that they're on private, one left, on private property, and you have to have permission to go and see them. This is interesting. Be careful when you meet polar bears, black dogs, princes, or goats. They just might be a troll. Walk in a circle around a rotten tree stump because it can be a troll trying to trick you. Look twice at a dark shadow, a crooked spruce, a mountain peak, because it might be a troll. Check for a tail under a skirt or through the pants of people who might have trollish ways. Watch out for people who swig down too much beer or who swear more than others. They probably are a troll in human form. Too much beer. Be on guard against the smell of frying pork as it filters through the canyons, the mountain cracks, and the caves and the glaciers and abandoned buildings, because that would attract a troll. Be on guard when suspicious say they'll go out and throw blueberries or smell for Christian blood. That runs through the tales all the time. It's like, I don't know how they smell it, but they're out there looking. And if there's Christian blood anywhere, trolls don't like it. Throw shiny coins at the foot of a troll mountain before going by it. Try to get the troll to cast off their skin and see if they're really a troll. Keep garlic in the house to discourage unwelcome guests from the troll world. In other words, they don't like garlic either. Watch out for a small child with a lot of hair in its ears. If you think it's a chargeling, try to get it to do weird things to reveal itself. Can you see how suspicious things were back then? I mean, even a child with hair in their ears. Just be careful. It might be a troll. This one is not very much fun. Use some excrement, which is an anti-demonic material, to keep the trolls away. So kind of like place it around. Then who smells? Always say God bless when a bride sneezes. The trolls will lose power over her. And always be careful so that you don't turn into a troll yourself. And I just read those this morning and I thought, oh, those are so cute. I have to share those. So, one thing that I want to talk about before I'm done is that there's a huge difference between the troll and the Nissa. Now, you have to remember that the Norwegians were controlled by the Danes and the Swedes on any given whatever have you. So the 15th of May is a big deal simply because they finally got their independence. So when you look at these little fellows, they usually say that Tunta is Swedish and Nissa is Norwegian. That's what most books say. So when we look at this little fellow, or this little fellow here, don't get them confused with a troll. They belong to the folklore of Norway and other Scandinavian countries, but they're not mean, dastardly, or whatever like trolls. They are little tricksters, or they're people you can blame. You know, like we've talked about how food is very important. So, you know, you don't want somebody to be over the milk bucket. You don't want to take responsibility for that. But a Nissa can do it. Darn it. They came and they were being a trickster and they kicked it over. And so it's those kind of things. So the farms in Norway, I don't know, maybe they still are in one family. It's just a real generational thing. So just like the farm has personalities, the Nissa who live on that farm have personalities too. And so if any property changes hands, at least in the olden days, you had to really check out the lay of the land for the Nissas that live there too. How do you take care of them? How do you appease them? How do you play with them? And so over time and in today's world, they've just become kind of a cute little gimmicky fellow that we put out at Christmas. But in the olden days, Romagrut was always put out the door, outside the door. And the Nissa, you would know if they used the best cream. And if you didn't use the best cream, there might be a little trouble down the line. And the Nissa usually they wanted to do good. They wanted to add something to your life. So the one little story, and this runs through so many of the stories, but there was a little girl named Lena, and it was December, and she was very sad. Her mother had passed away that summer when something came through the village, and it was just her and her two younger siblings and their dad. And their dad really wasn't interested in Christmas at all. And usually Lena would go out into the forest with her dad and cut the fresh branches and bring them in and put them on the dirt floor so that it would be nice and aromatic and beautiful for Christmas. And he wasn't interested in doing this at all. She really didn't know how to make the foods like the romagut and the krumkake and things that her mother made. And so it was just a very, very sad time because she said there just really wasn't going to be a Christmas. So she was walking through the woods and she decided to just sit and think for a little bit. And she heard a little rustle. And then she heard a little voice. She didn't know. But she just kind of said, you know, it's just going to be really sad this year. There just really isn't going to be any Christmas at my house. And a few little tears started to come down her face. And she went home, got ready for Christmas Eve, got cleaned up, got her siblings cleaned up, and then went to bed. And in the morning, there was pine boughs, new candles, and a beautiful spread of food. Guess there must have been a little nissa underneath those leaves. So that's the kind of thing that the nissa does and adds to the culture. And we could go on forever and ever on all these various things because if your name is Haugen, Hogan, Haugie, your creatures are underground. And that's another whole story. And it's a story for another day. Thank you for being such a good audience.
Oh. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, do
for
you have any
Diane?
questions at all? Yeah, Ruby.
I thought garlic got rid of vampires.
Well, it could be. You know, they might be a relative. You don't know, because
Okay.
look at those teeth. Vampire teeth are not so stellar either. So
Yeah.
maybe there might be a genetic connection someplace around. But it's just a really fun thing to explore whenever. And of course, I think you probably all know that there's a fellow who has created beautiful trolls up by Detroit Lakes. And Dwayne and I are going to try. Has anybody been there yet?
Yes.
They have to be just fun.
Oh, they're great.
And you have to try and see if you are they difficult to find?
You gotta walk.
Yeah. Anyway, that's on our bucket list to go
Oh, sure.
and see them. And I did this presentation for a group and they said that there's actually a troll university over in Mount Horeb.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. And for $95, I could go to the university for a weekend and learn more about trolls.
Oh, fun.
And it was in September. And it wasn't September, so it's like, no, we can't go. But I've got the website, and it's like, if they do that next year, it's like, that'd just be great fun.
It
You know,
would be.
because that's kind of like Norski heaven over there.
Right.
Anyway, and
Right.
so maybe next time I can teach a little bit more about trolls. Anybody have anything else? Paul?
This probably doesn't have anything to do with trolls, but when I was researching early Lanesboro papers a couple years ago, every winter, for a number of years, this creature appeared in the hills, and it was called a snow snake, you know, and it just appeared, and nobody would ever see it, but you'd always see the tracks of it.
Yeah, and you
And I
know,
thought, you know, there's a lot of Scandinavian
yes, and
influence in there.
there just is that kind of essence that goes through that, you know, Norwegian growing up. And like I said, with my grandma, I was an only child for 6 years, and I used to go up in Oak Ridge and stay with them a lot, and of course the big pine trees and the big forests and whatever. And so it kind of blended, you know, it kind of lent itself to the story. And Grandma, as you girls know, she was a storyteller anyway. She kind of listened, she kind of whatever. And the idea behind it is that, you know, those suspicions, those creatures, they just might be there. It's kind of like in the psyche.
No trolls, but there's plenty of rattlesnakes around.
Yeah, we can tell a few stories there
So, I
too.
mean, we'll make it a snow snake.
There were snow snakes in Houston too,
Was it really?
and hoop snake. Grab their tail in their mouth and roll down the hill like a barrel hoop.
Are you into that?
Yeah, I've heard stories about them growing up.
Okay.
Snow snakes and hoop snakes.
You never know.
No.
So this is great. I'm glad that I could do this to a small group because I don't like large groups because I can't talk with you, look at you, and whatever. I'm gonna have to use the microphone. So
Right.
this was great. Thanks for coming.
So, Was it the Huldas that used to steal kids, babies?
Aldras would, yes.
They would steal the babies and then they would
Yes.
take them and raise them.
Yes, yes, they would, yes, because they were Huldras. I mean, regular men didn't want to marry them, right? You know, so if they could snatch somebody else's baby, you know, they would. So, you know, I mean, it was like you had to be careful everywhere, you know, because of what might come out and harm you, you know, whatever. But a lot of the stories have to do with hunger, you know, with how you could trick, you know, in order to. And so I'm always kind of a little resident when I read this story about Butterball, but it's like, it just tells the whole story about the gruesomeness of it and the Christian blood and, you know, the old hag and the whole thing. You know, I mean, the Norwegian stories don't have anything, they have everything over Hansel and Gretel, you know, and sticking out the stick. I mean, these are really gruesome.
Yeah.
So thanks a bunch. Come on up and take a look at some of the stuff if you're interested in it, because there's some really interesting pictures in here. Some really ugly ones.
Okay, yes, and again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And he's got his tail pretty well covered, doesn't he? So you can see how some of them were very proud of their tail. Can you see how he's got his holding his tail? I mean, it's like
Well, someone said
Mhm.
that she felt